We are HeatPunks. Yes, Tyler mentioned before, and we are here because of the movement that Bitcoin mining represents. We don't care about your hash price. We don't give a fuck about the Bitcoin price. We care about heat. So I want to introduce everybody else on the panel. Obviously, Tyler and I have introduced ourselves, but Jonathan, can we start with you? Just go ahead and introduce yourself real quick.
My name is Jonathan Yuan. I've been in Bitcoin probably since 2010, but was a dummy for 10 years and finally got in for real in 2020. And I've been completely obsessed with waste heat because I don't see it as a waste. I see it as a great benefit.
Obsessed is the right word. I think we're all a little bit obsessed. Bob.
Sure. My name is Bob. I'm the creator behind the Home Bitcoin Immersion Mining channel. So I'm, producing content out there to educate people of how you integrate immersion heating into a home.
Awesome. Nico?
Hey everybody, Nico. I have a immersion system that I built myself, heavily referencing a lot of Bob's videos, and happy to be here.
Awesome. So today what we're going to talk about, we're going to expand a little bit on what Tyler and I were talking about. We talked a little bit about why we build Bitcoin mining rigs that heat our homes, but we're going to dive into a little bit of how. All of us here have built a mining rig in our homes that heats our house. On the screen right now is a rig that Tyler built, and if we go over, you can see how it kind of goes into the shroud and builds a little heater. We actually have something on the floor here that Jonathan built, which is pretty cool. So Jonathan, could you explain what you have here real quick?
Sure. So what we have on this is just careful because it's on. So this is actually an S19 board. So most of the people know S19s generally require 240 volts, which we don't have in our houses, which really sucks. Zach was super awesome and made the Loki board, which tricks the control board to say, hey, I got power, I'm good enough. So we're using a APW3 power supply. We're running off of 120 volts right now, and I also have a Wi-Fi on there that runs directly off that, and it runs as a single board. So it printed off the case, and I can move it around to any outlet I need in my house, anywhere I want heat.
Definitely. So this is a very easy rig. A lot of us who just get into Bitcoin mining and heat reuse, this is actually something that we take on first. I don't know about Nico here. I'm not sure if you built something small. You kind of went something a little bit bigger than that, right?
Yeah, I kind of went balls to the walls here if you see some of these pictures. So I have a fog hashing C2 tank and two K Pros seen there, and they go through a single loop heat system. And by turning on and off each zone of each one of those heat exchangers, I can control where I get the heat. So it's either in the tap water, it's either in the radiators, or it's outside.
Yeah, so what Nico here built was a much different system than what Jonathan over here has. And the greatest thing about these heat reuse systems is they can be built in many different ways. Everybody's got a different sized house, a different situation, and we can kind of just design these to go into our form factor that we need. The biggest problem that we're seeing right now is there isn't a specifically developed product for the entire industry as a whole. And I kind of want to dive into that a little bit, but before that, I want to talk to you guys and we'll have a little bit of a conversation about some of the problems that we're seeing with heat reuse. Nico, I know specifically you have one or two problems that you've had when building out the system. Can you kind of expound upon that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the main problem now, and you even alluded to it with these products, is that everything that you build is very custom to the house that it's in or the building. There's no one size fits all solution, and you're really trying to make the standard, S19 style thing work in these different applications. And so what Tyler's mentioning, where like if we can decouple that and maybe have different form factors, that's really going to like spread this out a hell of a lot more.
Yeah. So biggest problem is the form factor. We have another problem where these shoebox miners are not designed to fit inside of a lot of situations. But you also had another problem that we kind of talked about on our episode of the Build a Mine podcast, where when your PDU shuts off or when the power goes out, what happens?
Yes. So that's a current limitation with the fog hash tank. So it requires manual intervention to turn back on in the event of a power failure. There's also other things that will make it turn itself off. Like there's an over temp, it will turn itself off. However, the power to the miners is decoupled from the tank. So in the event of a power failure, I had to design around what happens when the pump for the tank shuts off, but the miners still have power, so they're just going to keep cycling and turning themselves on and off on over and over again, and that's really not good for them for the longevity. So my way around that was like a current sensing relay on the input power for the pump, and so that triggers another relay, which then triggers contactors that turn the miners on and off. So it's kind of like a safety system, but it's also just common sense. Like, oh, these need to be on at the same time. Like, let's make it so they physically cannot be on, or that they can't get out of sync.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This definitely ties into what Tyler was speaking to earlier, is that these problems that you're having, when someone builds you a product, like I have, you showed actually Antoine's heating system on your picture there, the space heater. So when someone builds you a system and they send it to you and, you're 300 miles away, 400, 1,000 miles away, it's not easy for them to just come and service your system. So a lot of us, we're psychopaths. We're used to beating ourselves over the back with a whip, and we continue building and continue developing these products. So it does take a little bit of ingenuity to figure these things out. Bob, you yourself have been building these immersion systems for a few years now. Can you tell us a little bit about the systems that you've designed and what are some of the issues that you've seen? This is some more pictures of Nico's build here. It's kind of cool. We'll get through these. I want to show Bob's here. This is actually my rig that I built, my Loki rig. Just very similar to Jonathan's, just a different form factor. But here is Bob's immersion system. So Bob, this is a very compact, very clean looking system. And I know for a fact that this did not happen in the first try. So tell us a little bit about your process and tell us a little bit about the problems that you've seen.
Sure. This system is my attempt at heating my clothes with the immersion heater. So this is actually sitting right on top of my clothes dryer, and I was taking the air through this system into the dryer to see if I could make this work. And honestly, pretty much every system is the same way, where you sit down and you kind of do the engineering, you kind of do the math, you think, okay, I got this right. You turn it on, and guess what? You got something wrong. And I think that's one of the big challenges, is that we're kind of pushing boundaries in terms of how do you do this on a small scale? How do you integrate this with your house? How do you make this work? And so pretty much every system I've had, this is a great example where I built it and I found out that, oh, I need like an extra two additional heat exchangers. Oh, I need extra floor. I need to do all these extra things off of that additional build. So I think that's one thing that you find everyone here has, is we have that can-do attitude, where you're going to walk in, you're going to try something and almost assuming that it's not going to work, and then go back in and fix it. And to me, this is a lot like, folks who work on their car. You can go off and buy a car, it's going to work. Right? Why do people build their cars in their garages? Because they like doing it. It's fun. The problem solving, the building, seeing your successes, seeing your failure. I mean, right now, that's kind of the type of person who's drawn to this. And I think that's where, when we move this forward, we need to start getting the knowledge base and information out there so that everyone isn't stumbling along. That maybe, yeah, they still have some problems to solve, but maybe it's only small details. It's not like fundamental of, oh, I have to rebuild half the system to make it work. So I think we've got a lot of knowledge we need to build as kind of that first tier of people in, and we need to communicate that out so that other people can learn and build on it.
How do you see that happening? How do you see, as Tyler kind of spoke about in his presentation, how do we get the normal people who aren't Bitcoiners? I know you talked about not speaking about hash rate, you're not speaking about Bitcoin, but how do we get systems like this? Is it something where we need to develop, kind of like HVAC technicians, but technicians for these systems? Like, how do you see that playing out? And if anybody else wants to expound on that, please do.
For me, there's two things. Is number one, for just people out there who want to do it, get out there and try. Like none of us knew what we were doing when we first started. I mean, you are going to be like, this is intimidating. This is kind of like little scary. Go and do it. Have fun. Enjoy it. I think that's something everyone needs to do to get off of square one. In terms of broad-based adoption, here's the thing we have to face. No one is going to install Bob's water heater. No one's going to install Bob's furnace. And I mean, if you're going to put a furnace or a water heater in a house, you're looking for a Lennox, a Trane, these big names that everyone has confidence behind. I think one of the things that we need to do is prove concept, prove that this works, prove that the economics works. And then somehow we need to reach out to those manufacturers of those home systems, get them to start seeing what this can do for them, I mean, let's face it. Imagine one of the major water heater companies out there decided to go down this path. Imagine for all the electric water heaters across the United States, they had their systems out there and they were getting free power. As a miner, they would be bigger than any commercial miner today. And you just need someone to kind of have that vision to see that, hey, if I put the time in now, if I design the system today and start using my distribution network, my HVAC technicians, get them trained up, and this is a 5 to 10 year endeavor. But at the end of that, wow. I mean, you can just see a company that takes this on, a first mover. Like I said, they're going to be the biggest miner out there.
That's exactly. I mean, and when we look at a company like that, we've already got smart water heaters. We got smart water softeners. Everything is smart in your home, your fridge. So having a smart device like a smart heater in your home is really pretty trivial from a concept of what your home needs. You know, if we were 20 years back, like internet at your house, maybe you didn't have that, but today you got electric where you need it. You got internet already. Having a deliverable piece of hardware that could be installed, like a water heater specifically, it's already all together. You plug it in, you connect it to your Wi-Fi. You probably got an app on your phone just so you can see what's going on. The manufacturer knows about it. That's where that needs to get to. And having a large scale manufacturer, like you said, where somebody can just say, "Hey, I'm going to replace my water heater anyway. I want a little bit of Bitcoin. I can get this all done at one shot, and I don't need to build something crazy and wacky and awesome. No problem. We can do that."
To build off of what those guys were saying, the reason it's so important to talk to these manufacturers with all the decades of experience as well is because these are fundamentally different types of heating systems. You alluded to it earlier, Trevor. You said, well, people just buy a furnace or a boiler. It's rated for 100,000 BTU and it fits most houses. The reason that works is because it's completely oversized. 100,000 BTU is not your demand. You may use 10,000 BTU. The system operates what's called bang bang or on off. Your thermostat kicks up when it's 68 degrees, it shuts off at 71, kicks off at 71, turns back on at 68, so it goes on, off, on, off. Maybe that's 5 minutes of the hour. So you take 100,000 BTU, you multiply it by 5 divided by 60, that's your duty cycle. You're not using 100,000 BTU. Bitcoin miners don't run this way. Imagine buying 100,000 BTU worth of miners. There's something called revenue generating assets and the ratio of revenue generating assets. Imagine buying 40 miners and saying, we're just going to use one of them, right?
Just use one.
What I'm describing here is you can't just design one product that consumes fuel, natural gas, or propane, or whatever that can fit like most sizes. It's much more integrated. You do have to size it properly. It's fundamentally different to these manufacturers how it operates. Bitcoin miners don't like to turn on and off. They want it. You can dial them back in firmware. You can tell it to run at 3/4 power. That equals 75 degrees. So we really need to communicate and get frontward facing with these manufacturers because we could use their help. And it's a completely different method of heating.
Yeah. How do you guys see that playing out? I know that there's a lot of these manufacturers that they're not even paying attention to Bitcoin. So is it, infiltrating their businesses as Bitcoiners, or is it something that we need to come to them as a movement?
Profitable heat. That's it.
We need a mole.
What's that?
We need a mole.
Proof of concepts, I think, will help. And then we'll bring them out, show them the numbers.
And over the last year, I've talked with some of the guys up in Constellation, up in Ottawa, who are, building the pool heater. Yeah.
Heaters, yeah.
We had a really good conversation about, there are Bitcoin conferences. There are conferences out there for furnace suppliers, furnace manufacturers, home heating. We need a Bitcoiner to convince someone to give them a half out. Go up there in front of everyone and say, I know I'm crazy. You're going to all think I'm crazy, but here's the story. Here's Bitcoin mining. Here's how you as a appliance manufacturer can use this. Here's a business model where you actually may be more profitable than you are today. Just get that idea in their heads. I mean, really 90% of people are going to be like, oh yeah, whatever. But that 10% who listens, that's going to be maybe the next generation of CEO, the next generation of managers, the next generation of R&D engineers. I think that might be the easiest way of getting out there, is just reaching out and going to their conferences and giving a talk, letting them know this is something out there.
Definitely. And, in Bitcoin, we have this concept of low time preference. We are willing to spend time and take the long journey. So I think what you're getting at is that we need to get into these conferences. We need to start bringing up Bitcoin in these conversations. And if it takes us 10 years to do it, that's fine. We want to decentralize the network. The whole goal is 10 years from now, there's more Bitcoin miners in homes, heating homes, and even businesses. I think that the next thing I want to really cover is what is the different dynamic between businesses and homes. But really, we're gonna decentralize the space through a low time preference mindset and get into these conferences, get into these business models through that. So, Tyler, you have an interesting take on the difference between home mining and business mining. I know that it's not very economically viable for home miners to mine Bitcoin, but what does that look like with businesses?
Yeah, so I've kind of generally painted the playing field as this making the most sense for commercial operations, commercial and industrial. There's a handful of reasons for that. Things like tax write-offs, things like depreciation of assets, things like consumer electrical prices. They get cheaper power, right? All these things, they also use heat usually in larger quantities, so you get a better ratio of those revenue generating to non-generating assets. They might have higher duty cycles. If it's a greenhouse or something, they use heat even if it's summer. They might be unlinked to the climate. That all that is to say, it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't make sense for any homes. Right now, it's just the psychopaths and the DIY guys, like all of us here, right? And we're tinkerers, and we'll lose money doing it. We're following those ideological incentives, some economic, but if you're a very certain homeowner in northern Canada and you use a lot of heat and your furnace was broken anyways and you needed a new one, maybe it makes sense. But for most people, I believe, the $6,000 you would have spent to integrate the system, you're probably better off just buying Bitcoin. That opportunity cost. That's my prediction. And then I still think that means hash rate heating will play out in large quantity. I think we're just going to start to see where every commercial industrial operator is going to use Bitcoin mining on site for some balance of load management and heating.
I want to say about home mining, I had one single S19 running on air, plugged right into my furnace all winter, and my furnace barely ever turned on for 4,000 square feet in Minnesota.
It's a large house. So
Size house, and it's 3 levels, and I had the fan going on all the time, and almost never did the natural gas furnace kick on. So all winter long.
yeah, so I have a little bit of a different scenario. Earlier, I talked about my 800 square foot single wide home. So I'm developing a product right now that will sit behind the wall above my furnace. And I have not turned my furnace on since the beginning of this year. So the months of January and February, my furnace turned off. I used an S9 to heat my house. It's 109 joules per terahash, and I saved $25 every single month, not counting the Bitcoin that I was able to stack. So using a machine that's 39 joules per terahash, it's much more efficient. Yes, it costs me a lot to do it. It will take me about 5 years at my current usage to pay off the machine. But again, I don't care about that. I care about the heat reuse aspect of it. So, it's an interesting thing. Right now we're using these miners for low grade heat. Tyler, you talked about this. What are the incentives and what does the future look like? And any one of you can answer this question. What does it look like when chip manufacturers start developing chips that have higher temperature thresholds?
But as soon as we can get a chip that could actually get water to a boiling point, so you could maybe have a chip in oil, let's say, and you can get that oil to 250 degrees. That oil can be brought into water and bring that up to boiling. That changes everything. There's a lot of industrial manufacturing that goes on that needs boiling water at a specific amount, and we just can't get there with today. If you can make a chip that can tolerate that kind of heat in an industrial setting, that's massive win.
I think that is the goal. If you can get boiling temperature, literally all industrial processes are now fair game. And when you look at this system here, I built. The actual truth is it works, but not great. The reason why is because an S19 miner doesn't get that hot. Even if you could get a chip in the say high 100, 150 to 175 degrees Fahrenheit, even that would be a huge improvement over a lot of what we have right now. So it doesn't take, the 250 degree chip that's what we need. But even if we could just get a little better, it's going to open a lot of doors for enabling heat reuse.
And what changes when you have boiling fluids, steam, is you can start to do work applications. Sorry for my engineer brain, everybody, but I alluded to it in my presentation. So you can turn the heat back into electricity. when it boils. You can run it through something what's called an organic ranking cycle. It spins a turbine. The steam spins a turbine. Connect that turbine to a generator, which is an electric motor. And you put kinetic motion in, you get current out, charge a battery. So as soon as you can boil the fluids, we can take heat. Imagine this. Imagine a pubco that had all their exhaust heat. They captured it. It was hot enough. They ran it through an organic ranking cycle. Maybe it's 10% efficient. They just cut their power bill by 10% because they're just making 10% of their own power from the heat. So you can do a lot of cool stuff once you get into those temperatures. Oh, last thing. If you look at the Bitmain spec sheet, a lot of the chips are rated for 100 degrees Celsius. It's like the hash boards, the PCBs, and all this other stuff that's limiting it. So,
True. Yeah.
So how do we get there? What does that look like? We know that that's what we need, but the chip manufacturer, are the ones creating the chips.
yeah, that's another Goliath of an industry to move. Just like the heating industry, we basically want everybody to listen to us, but no one's listening to us.
Yeah, we're the crazy guys.
Yeah. But yeah, we need a device that you can take an output of and have that temperature liquid, whatever that is. If it's a specific oil that you need, if it's some particular kind of a thing, but some kind of an output that is an air at that temperature. That's what's needed. And obviously you're not going to be running water through because you're already boiling it in the, that's not going to that's not going to work well. You need some kind of a liquid that can handle that heat right on the chip, taking that off and sending it to something productive.
I think one thing that I've really liked seeing is the BitX team. They're making all these little tiny BitX miners. They're kind of fun. It's lottery mining, but look what they're doing. They're saying, hey, we are going to be generating chips and enabling people to kind of build their own configuration. They're right now just kind of figuring out the basics. But let's say we say, okay, you've got this basics figured out. Now, hey, why doesn't that community take on a high temperature chip? And maybe take on the ability to put that chip in any configuration you want. Maybe you want to make a long strip heater that goes in a water heater, right? I mean, you think about what they're doing right now with just kind of building that community, that infrastructure, that know-how. That may be a path that we get there, is that we as a community just figure it out a little bit by little bit.
Yeah, I definitely see it moving that way. One thing I heard back when I first started my journey is Bitcoin hair dryers. If we can get the chip temperatures up that high, maybe our wives and girlfriends can heat their hair with a Bitcoin hair dryer, and they don't even have to know that it's Bitcoin. So we're gonna incept the idea into their hearts and minds. I want to open up the rest of this conversation. We've got a few people in the crowd here. I think that some of you are probably very curious about the projects that we've built, the dynamics, the incentives that we have. So I'd like to open it up for questions. I'll walk around and hand the mic out, and we'll just do that from here on out. You had your hand up first, sir. Tell us your name and go ahead and ask the question.
Thank you. Jacob Newman. I appreciate hearing all this. I had two things. First off, kind of a question, I guess. I love all this. I actually heated my house. It was middle of the winter, 80 degrees. We actually had a pipe freeze in the basement because of not having enough circulation in the house. We had a window open on the second floor, but we had a pipe freeze in the basement. So I love all this, but my concern is efficiency. And you just can't beat the thermal cycle. I'm not a mechanical engineer, but there's a thing with the refrigeration or with the heat pumps, right? And you can get out a higher output than what you put in. You can effectively make 3,000 watts of heat with only 1,000 watts if you use the heat pump cycle, right? So
yeah,
how do you compete from an energy perspective? There's all these incentives and all this concern about reducing energy consumption. How do you make that practical to not use a heat pump water heater, a heat pump for your furnace, and then have a dedicated Bitcoin mining machine? Wouldn't that be more efficient, more maintainable? I mean, I'd love this to be feasible, but how do you compete against the dedicated solutions?
Great question. And heat pumps are really interesting, right? Because you get super high efficiency, 4 or 5x on your electricity. You can't beat that. I mean, the efficiency is efficiency. Your heat pump moves heat; it doesn't generate heat. But if you look at the cost efficiency, the operational cost, mining for a lot of the modern miners, even if you have a COP of 4 or 5 on that heat pump, you actually, as a homeowner, operational cost, it's lower to mine because of the Bitcoin sats you get back. So the math does work out for those systems. So you can beat that, but you'll never beat the efficiency. It's more or less just operating costs, and that's kind of the I guess would be the selling point of mining over a heat.
Yeah, it's
Heat-
100% loss system. You're paying for the heat. That's great, but that's it. That's all you get.
Heat pumps also, it's similar to an air conditioner, and just in reverse. They move heat, like Bob said, they don't generate it. So they start to perform poorly in very cold climates and in high altitude climates where there's not much energy density in the air. So there is a target market where, a lot of heat pumps have an auxiliary backup electric resistive heater inside of them so they can deliver heat if it gets too cold outside. At the very least, that could be a Bitcoin miner inside of the heat pump.
Yeah.
So there's a target market for it.
Yeah,
Great
and so I had a heat pump, and it only goes a certain degree, and then it switches over to natural gas because it couldn't handle it. So there's still that balance where it wouldn't be able to operate because it's too cold.
I think maybe to answer the other question about, the problem you have as far as getting heat around the home, that actually is a really good part of system design. And you've seen different people struggle with that. And there are ways that you can use your existing furnace and its fan to actually use that. Your existing furnace is built to get heat where it's needed. If you use that fan system and supply heat to it, that's kind of a way around it. You can fight that so you don't end up with cold spots and hot spots in your home. You had your hand up.
So I've played around with the S9 space heater concept for a while, and thinking about mechanical engineering is my background in product design, and one of the biggest hurdles in designing any product is just convincing a user of its benefits aside from its like obvious things. So like it sounds kind of dumb, but like how do you convince people to connect the space heater to their Wi-Fi? Like it sounds like a dumb hurdle, but like it will stop people. So like what are your guys' proposals or thoughts about that?
You got the right idea there. Like this stuff is all very niche, and we're all in the weeds. We're like we can log into our systems and get to access to these panels. Most people don't care. They don't want any of that. They just want to turn something on. And I definitely agree. Like that's going to be a huge hurdle because when you're buying like a dryer, you don't care that it also does this. Now, maybe you can rephrase that and say like, oh, you get a rebate from the company and you mine the company's pool and you get a payout. Like you can maybe phrase stuff like that, but it's a big hurdle to get people to care if you're not already a tinker and you're already into it. Like, what do you guys think?
Maybe you could convince people if they know they're going to get the Bitcoin, some space heater, right? They download an app. They're like, okay, this is going to pay me. But you're right. How do you break that glass ceiling if it's an appliance company that sells space heaters and they undercut everybody in cost and they want all the sats? So then the user doesn't even get any Bitcoin. They're just told they have to plug it into the Wi-Fi for it to work. That's a great question. That's a big challenge. I'm sure that will be a barrier that keeps people away. So
The easiest way I break it down to somebody that maybe isn't too savvy on is profitable heat. Like, do you want to pay for your heat or do you want your heat to pay you?
100%. I think that's kind of why we're all here is we want to get paid to heat our homes. And even if it's a break even cost, now we're no longer paying for the heat that we're generating. I have this idea that, the middle class is what built this country. We built this country off the backs of giants, and those giants were the middle class. And the middle class has been undercut and devastated and just destroyed for the last 110 years since they created the Federal Reserve. But what happens, and I have no numbers to substantiate this, but what happens when you can lower the cost of living and increase the quality of living for all people in the world? I mean, Tyler spoke in his presentation earlier about how there's a direct correlation between energy usage and the richness of a country. Well, I believe that also correlates to an individual. And if you can increase your energy usage, but also reduce the cost of energy generation, I believe that we can move into a world where people live better lives and we no longer have to fight about the trivial matters. So you had your hand up, sir.
So my question kind of plays off of the first one as well. You guys were saying like a liquid that you were looking for the heat exchanger. Have you guys looked into just using a heat pump or refrigerant loop as that liquid instead? So you're transmitting the heat sink side is your cold side, and then it's amping up that under pressure as your hot side to act as your heat exchanger in like a like a typical residential furnace, or even outside, so you can cut those costs down of not needing the liquid that actually can handle it. The refrigerant would handle it all as well. You might be able to, even if it was like a split system type of deal, you could use the different zones of the split system as the house and the miner to work in accordance with each other. Has that been looked at all yet?
I would love to build a system like that. I mean, if you think about what's really cool is you could take a heat pump and couple it with a miner to actually get to some of those high temperatures. When you start thinking of heat pump instead of I'm just heating my house, use it as a temperature amplification device. Maybe it's the best way of describing it. If you couple that with a miner, you could maybe use the miner as the heat generator and then use heat pump to step that up. Now you have usable heat, and it's one of those ideas. I'm like, man, that'd be fun to build.
It's all about those temperatures.
Yeah.
And the same thing works in the opposite direction. Once you get hotter temperatures, you can run an absorption chiller, which is just an air conditioner powered by heat instead of electricity. So I agree. I'd love to see these projects tinkered on.
I'd say you got the right idea there with the efficiency mindset. Like you don't want to needlessly use electricity. Well, to Tyler's point, like you want the abundance mindset, but you're right where these are effectively just resistive heaters at the end of the day. But with the Bitcoin network, it empowers us to do all these things. So what these guys were saying, like this will eventually be a complementary technology as these integrate.
Yeah, I think what you identified, to summarize it, is you have to find an additional utility for mining. Just plugging in to get Satoshis, those days are almost done.
Yep.
Another cycle or two, you got to balance the load. You got to be off grid and have essentially free power, or you have to be monetizing the heat or getting some utility value out of it to compete. It's my opinion.
Any more questions?
You alluded to this actually with the idea of the space heater that's more or less subsidized. You just have to connect it to Wi-Fi, right? But what occurred to me was the business model of I've heard rumor that a lot of these smart TVs are actually sold less expensively. I mean, you can actually buy a smart TV cheaper than a dumb TV, but partly because of the data, right? And the company is collecting that data when you connect it to Wi-Fi. And the reason you connect it to Wi-Fi is because it's a smart TV and you want to get the streaming services, right? But that's also how the company gets the data that they use to subsidize the price of the TV. Something like that. I mean, you could imagine the good that that would do for people, especially lower income people, that sort of thing. Talking about the middle class, it's time, your furnace broke. It's time to get a new furnace. Oh, your share of the cost is $500. All you have to do is make sure it's connected to Wi-Fi. And instead of $5,000, it's $500. Now, granted, all the Bitcoin ends up going to Train or wherever else like that, but no different than an LG or some other smart TV, right? So I'll throw that idea out there in different words.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean that's what in Tyler's talk, that the business models that are out there. I mean, think about it. Someone walks up to your driveway and says, "Hey, your furnace, your white here's out. I'll give you one for free. Just keep it hooked up to the internet. Just give it power." I mean, to me, I look at the solar power industry in terms of the roof mounted solar panels. Look at all the different business models they have out there, right? They have some where they own the panels, they own the electricity, and you just pay a small cost. There's some where there's lease. There's some where the homeowner owns everything. There's a huge spectrum of business models out there. I think when this starts to take off, you're going to see the full spectrum here as well. So all those ideas, I think, are great.
Yeah, totally agree with that. When you think about the like a mega mine, like 5,000 machines going, right, all in one big space, all just blowing off heat. But what if you had 5,000 machines in 5,000 homes? And I kind of look at it like almost as, I've been in IT for about 30 years, and so I kind of look at it from an operational standpoint of just users. And so your company maybe has a tiny little office, but you have 5,000 machines out there all doing your work, and you don't have one big giant mega mine with a couple megawatts coming in. You've got them scattered everywhere, and you can support them all remotely in certain ways. But that is your business model. And then, like you said, maybe it's free. Maybe the hardware's completely free. You just sign up, like, great, we'll send it out to you. You plug it in. Once it's plugged in, you get your heat. We get our Bitcoin. We're all good.
They might maintain it for free.
Yep, absolutely. Because it's their incentive to keep it online because they're getting the revenue from it. So if it's not online, that person that owns that business that owns that, needs to go and service that.
And think about this: you have an internet connection to that device. You, as a service provider, anytime if that device goes down, you can call them up and say,
Yep.
"Hey, I noticed your water heater's having a
Oh, yeah.
problem." You think about the ancillary business model on top of that. I mean, you start thinking about how this could be done.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways this would work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the only thing I'd really add to that is that besides the commercial cases, I think there will always be people like us tinkering with this. You get a much higher ROI, you get more flexibility, and some people just really like that and think you're looking at four of them.
I really like the idea of supporting the home miners and giving them access to this. But I think there's also a lot of opportunity in commercial applications. I'm in the lumber industry, and a big process in that is heat treating, where you have to dry lumber. And so a lot of these operations could be running their sawmills during the day, and so to speak, and drying their lumber at night and just using crypto to offset that, and instead of paying natural gas and burning all that up. So there's lots of applications for commercial.
I actually think you're completely right on. There's more potential right now in commercial and in places like that. I looked at a distillery and they heat water up from ground temperature up to 180, and that comes back to the chip temperature thing. It's just outside, so it's almost there. But drying lumber in greenhouses and all these commercial places where like, hey, we need to run heat for 72 hours straight. Perfect.
Yeah, the duty cycle is key. Those commercial applications tend to just use heat more frequently. It's not only in January when it's cold, right? And so for an electrical, complex, expensive, power dense heater, you want a fast ROI. That's the language that businesses speak. And so you really got to identify people that just use heat all the time. And that's a great example.
Yeah, something I've seen, I actually know a miner who's building a Bitcoin mine in Albany, Oregon. And, the whole idea of Bitcoin mining is to generate more Bitcoin and to continue holding onto that Bitcoin. What this miner has decided to do, they're going to build a megawatt of mining capacity. They're going to air cool the miners and send that air into a greenhouse that is built right next door. What they're going to then do is they're going to grow crops for the local population, which they will then sell at the farmers market and even donate some to different areas. But what that kind of means is that they're going to be able to generate revenue in this process of mining Bitcoin. And the revenue generated would, in theory, pay for the electricity that they're using to mine the Bitcoin. So they don't ever have to sell their Bitcoin in order to stay mining, which is, I think, a big problem that we're going to see in the future. Everybody's over in that room talking about industrial mining applications, which is awesome. We need them to help us secure the network. But every single industrial miner that is wasting heat at a specific time right now when hash price is low and Bitcoin's trading sideways, they're selling their Bitcoin in order to continue making Bitcoin. It's kind of like a catch-22. So what are those incentives, or what are those what does it mean for the future of Bitcoin mining when the process of creating the heat is creating revenue in another business model that allows you to pay for your electricity? Awesome. Any more questions? No? Okay, well, do you guys have anything you want to wrap up on today? I think we covered a lot of really important topics.
One thing that I just love to point out, like you go back in the 70s, computing was done with big, giant mainframe computers. Then a bunch of guys in their garages were figuring out how to make tiny little computers, figuring it out. 20 years later, everyone has a personal computer in their homes.
And it started off so, small, like I had ISA cards and you had to figure out the hierarchy and memory settings and put jumpers on the boards and make sure that was all set right before you plugged everything in. Otherwise, it wouldn't work at all. And having to know all those details, there wasn't any Google searching and stuff like that. So we're kind of in that same space. We're a little bit further along, I think. But, those small, like this right here is just like I had to research all this stuff and cobble these things together. It's very similar.
Give us 20 years.
5.
We're trying to help that. I'm trying to keep everyone together. I got to add you to the group, but we're all part of a heat punk group on Telegram. I see Dane in the crowd. He's also in it. So I'm working on building a forum. Right now, why is all the information in Telegram? Why do I have to reach out to people individually? Why, we should be talking to each other. These are challenges that we need to resolve together. We need to identify the plan of action. A forum is a great point. Back to Bob's comment about building cars. I can find anything I want about how to fix my car from 2002 random blog post.
I do it all the time.
I need to do that for Bitcoin miners. So we just need to compile our information and help educate each other, solve problems together.
Yeah, it's that low time preference thinking. I think that if you look back 5 years ago, this wasn't really a topic of even consideration. And now we're here today. We're talking on a panel of pleb miners and heat punks, and every single one of you has an opportunity to change your life and become the best version of yourself. It's kind of what I was alluding to in the beginning of my presentation. I think it'll be an interesting 5 to 10 years, and after that, what the world will look like will be much different. So, and it's because we are psychopaths building and tinkering, and again, we don't care about your hash price. So awesome. Well, thank you guys for being here today. This was the HeatPunks Pleb Miner panel, and if you guys want to talk with us after this, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. These guys are very knowledgeable. Most of them have been in the space for a long time. I'm the new Bitcoiner, the green Bitcoiner, you could say. And from these guys alone, I have learned a lot of my information on the Build a Mine podcast. Some of them have been on, some of them are planning to come on, and they're just a wealth of information. So Tyler, to your point, we need to get that information out there. Let's spread the good word of pleb mining, and let's build this network together. Thank you guys. Also, just so everybody knows, after lunch, I will be doing my first in-person podcast with Maestro Jurgen, who is an ASIC tech. He teaches people how to repair ASICs. He's actually in the Build a Mine room right now teaching people how to do that. So he's going to be coming on. If you guys want to sit in for that podcast in person, that's totally fine. We'd love to have you here. But other than that, enjoy your lunch, and we're so glad for you guys being here.
Thank you.
Dude, thank you.